When three leather-clad bikers surrounded my pregnant wife in our driveway while she was carrying groceries, I thought it was random road rage until I saw our HOA president, Delilah, smirking from across the street like she was watching her favorite Netflix show. I'm at my kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips as these wannabe sons of anarchy extras circle Elena. The crunch of gravel under their steel-toed boots sounds like broken bones, and motorcycle exhaust burns my nostrils even through the screen door. The biggest, one complete with skull bandana and a beer gut that screams midlife crisis, steps so close to my 7 months pregnant wife that her grocery bags tumble to the concrete. "Lady, there's going to be consequences for your husband's non-compliance," he growls, reading from what's obviously a script. Elena, ice cold, doesn't flinch, doesn't cry, just picks up her groceries and walks inside. That's when I know these idiots have no idea what they've just stepped in. See, 12 years as a military contractor taught me how to identify threats, gather intelligence, and eliminate problems efficiently. And in exactly 3 minutes, these clowns would be at my door, not to threaten, but to beg me to make their nightmare stop. Delilah was about to learn that messing with a soldier's pregnant wife is career suicide. What would you do if bikers threatened your family over lawn violations? Drop your location below. I guarantee your HOA has horror stories too. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name is Marcus M. Donovan, 45 years old, and I spent 12 years managing logistics for military contractors in places where saying the wrong thing to the wrong person could get you killed. My wife, Elena, is a pediatric nurse, 32, tough as nails, and 7 months pregnant with our first kid. We moved to Willowbrook Estates 6 months ago, dropped $485,000 on a corner lot house because we needed space for our growing family. This neighborhood, picture-perfect suburban paradise on the surface. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, the kind of place where people actually use those little plastic bags for their dog's business. But scratch beneath that surface and you'll find it's run like a petty dictatorship by one woman, Delilah Hartwell. Delilah's 52, been HOA president for 6 straight years, running unopposed, and she treats our community like her personal kingdom. She's also a real estate agent who profits directly from keeping property values high, which means any deviation from her vision of suburban perfection gets crushed hard. The woman lives in the biggest house in the development, 2.3 acres, $750,000. And if you think that's a coincidence, you've never dealt with small-town tyrants. Our first conflict started innocently enough. Where most neighbors planted water-hungry grass that needs constant irrigation, I installed drought-resistant native landscaping. Makes sense, right? Better for the environment, saves water, actually encouraged by the county. But 2 days after my landscaper finished, there's Delilah on my doorstep with a violation notice. Unapproved landscaping materials, she says, like I'd installed a junkyard. I researched the hell out of this. Spent 3 days reading HOA bylaws, county ordinances, state water conservation guidelines. My native plants weren't just legal, they were exactly what environmental experts recommended. So, I filed a formal appeal complete with documentation from the County Water Authority and environmental impact studies. That's when the harassment started. Violation notices began appearing weekly. Fence height legal. Mailbox style identical to 12 other houses. Tree pruning completely unnecessary. But here's the kicker. I started paying attention to the rest of the neighborhood. Delilah's friends had identical violations. She ignored completely. Martha Kowalski, the sweet 70-year-old widow 3 houses down, 1,000 in bogus fines for a garden gnome. Trevor and Sage, the young tech couple with solar panels. Constant harassment for unsightly equipment that's actually increasing their home value. The smell of fresh mulch from my native garden mixed with the constant worry of sprinkler systems on my neighbors' traditional lawns. A perfect metaphor for the clash between common sense and suburban conformity. Installed security cameras after Elena mentioned cars driving slowly past our house, and sure enough caught HOA board members photographing our property like we were running a meth lab. Elena just wanted peace during her pregnancy. "Can't we just plant some grass and avoid the conflict?" she'd ask. But I'd seen enough bullies in my military days to know that backing down only makes them push harder. Besides, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every family. That gets steamrolled by petty authoritarians who mistake a clipboard for actual power. The violation notices kept coming, printed on the cheapest copy paper you can imagine, like Delilah was afraid to invest in quality intimidation materials. One threatened bigger fines, legal action, even liens on our property, but she made one crucial mistake. She assumed I'd fold under pressure like her previous victims. Lady clearly never dealt with someone who'd managed supply chains in combat zones. Weeks after my appeal, Delilah decided to flex her tiny muscles. She called an emergency HOA board meeting about what she dramatically termed dangerous non-compliance threatening community standards. The woman has a flair for theatrics. I'll give her that. Here's where it gets interesting. She scheduled this emergency for Tuesday at 2 p.m., right during Elena's shift at the Children's Hospital and my physical therapy appointment for an old shoulder injury. Coincidence? About as likely as Delilah developing a personality. She stacked the meeting with her usual suspects. Bryce, a retired bank VP who treats HOA meetings like board meetings for Goldman Sachs, and Maureen, whose main qualification is being treasurer of the country club. With a grand total of 4 residents present, 3 of them Delilah's cronies, they passed a motion for an immediate $2,500 fine plus daily penalties of $50 until I replaced my non-compliant landscaping. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. I know because I timed it when I watched the security footage later. But here's what Delilah didn't count on. I actually read the HOA governing documents. All 87 pages of mind-numbing legalese that nobody else bothered to study. From my military days, I remembered a contractor explaining how legal documents work in hierarchy CC&Rs at the top, then bylaws, then rules and regulations, and that any amendment contradicting a higher-level document becomes automatically invalid. Most people don't realize this little legal loophole can save them thousands in bogus HOA fines. Buried in Section 4.32 was a beautiful little clause requiring 72 hours notice for emergency meetings. They gave residents 48. Delilah had just handed me a legal sledgehammer to demolish her entire power play. Spent that evening crafting a legal challenge that would make a federal prosecutor proud, documented every procedural violation, cited relevant statutes, and submitted it with enough certified copies to wallpaper Delilah's McMansion. The meeting was invalid. The vote was meaningless, and their $2,500 fine had about as much legal weight as monopoly money. Then I started digging deeper into those governing documents. And boy, did I strike gold. Delilah had amended the HOA bylaws twice in the past 18 months, without membership approval. The original bylaws, the ones actually voted on by homeowners, required full membership approval for any fine increases over $100. Every penalty she'd issued in the past year and a half was legally worthless. This is where my military training kicked in. In logistics, you don't just solve the immediate problem. You identify the systemic issues that created it. So I sent certified letters to all 127 homeowners explaining exactly how their HOA president had been breaking the law for 18 months. I included copies of the illegally amended documents, highlighted the violations, and offered free consultation for anyone who'd been overcharged. The response was like opening floodgates. Families contacted me within 48 hours. Martha with her $8,000 garden gnome persecution, Trevor and Sage facing harassment over solar panels that actually increase property values. A retired teacher named Dorothy who'd been fined $600 for painting her front door the wrong shade of blue, even though the approved color chart included 17 different blues, and hers was definitely on the list. The crunch of gravel in my driveway became a constant soundtrack as neighbors stopped by to share their horror stories. Each tale more ridiculous than the last, each fine more obviously illegal than the previous one. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of rustling papers as we documented 18 months of systematic abuse. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to bury Delilah's entire operation. But Delilah wasn't done escalating. When she realized how many residents were challenging her authority, she panicked and decided to double down. Her response: threatened to place liens on multiple properties and contact mortgage companies claiming widespread property violations were affecting neighborhood home values. Classic bully behavior. When losing control, threatened nuclear war. My counterpunch was surgical precision. I organized the affected homeowners into a formal coalition with shared legal representation and began preparing a class action challenge to 18 months of illegal fines. Game on Delilah. Delilah's retaliation came swift and petty. Within a week of my legal challenge, she hired Executive Protection Services, a fancy name for two guys in polo shirts driving around in a white Ford Explorer with magnetic door signs. Their job? Patrol our neighborhood with special attention. To my property, because apparently my drought-resistant landscaping posed a clear and present danger to suburban America. The security guards started showing up at 7 a.m. sharp, parking directly across from my house and just sitting there watching, taking notes. One of them actually issued me a trespassing warning for walking on the sidewalk that runs along the community's common area. I'm not kidding. They tried to ban me from public walkways in my own neighborhood. But here's where Delilah made her first major tactical error. I recognized one of the guards from my morning jog. Big guy, buzz cut, the kind of military bearing you can spot from a mile away. Turns out Jimmy served 2 tours in Afghanistan before getting into private security when he realized I was former military too. He started sharing some very interesting information. During our casual conversations, like how Executive Protection Services is owned by Delilah's brother-in-law, Russell Hartwell, and how their contract specifically mentions making certain residents uncomfortable enough to consider relocating. Jimmy showed me photos on his phone of the guards harassing old Martha about her garden gnome, intimidating the young family with solar panels and following Elena to her car when she left for work. The metallic taste of anger filled my mouth as I watched security footage of these clowns stalking my pregnant wife. But anger without strategy is just noise, and I needed leverage, not satisfaction. So I started my own surveillance operation. Military logistics taught me that information is power, and I began documenting every illegal move these rental cops made. Turns out they were violating about 12 different state laws governing private security companies operating outside their licensed jurisdiction, harassing residents without cause, failing to wear proper identification badges. Jimmy also let slip that Executive Protection Services had subcontracted the more serious intimidation to a local motorcycle club called the Ironwood Riders. Not real. Bikers, mind you, just weekend warriors led by Delilah's nephew Randy, a 28-year-old with a fraud conviction who still lives in his mom's basement. The sound of their deliberately loud pipes echoing through our quiet streets became the neighborhood's new alarm clock. Meanwhile, I was building something Delilah never expected, a community coalition, started with informal meetings at Murphy's Diner on Main Street, where the coffee strong and the booths have seen better decades. First meeting drew 7 residents, second meeting 18. By the 4th week, we had 47 people crammed into that diner sharing stories and planning strategy. That's where I met Phyllis Brennan, a retired attorney who'd been itching for a good fight since her law firm forced her into retirement, sharp as a tack at 72 with silver hair and the kind of courtroom presence that makes opposing counsel nervous. She offered to handle our legal work pro bono, partly because she was bored, but mostly because she despised bullies. We also gained Diego Ramirez, former city councilman, who knew exactly which government officials to contact about HOA violations. Diego brought something invaluable: connections with local media and a deep understanding of municipal politics. While we were organizing, Delilah was escalating. She filed noise complaints with the city about my lawnmower, even though I only used it on Saturday mornings within legal hours. She tried to have my home-based consulting business shut down for zoning violations, despite the fact that I met with clients maybe twice a month and generated less foot traffic than a weekly bridge game. The woman was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. But every desperate move just gave me more ammunition. I filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board, submitting evidence of illegal amendments, selective enforcement, and financial irregularities spanning Delilah's entire 6-year reign of terror. Then came the moment that changed everything. Was reviewing security footage from the previous night when I caught something that made my blood run cold. Delilah meeting with her nephew Randy behind the community center at 11 p.m. The audio was crystal clear through my directional microphone. "Whatever it takes to get them out," she said, handing him an envelope thick with cash. "I don't care what you have to do, but that family needs to understand they're not welcome here." Randy nodded, pocketing the money. "Don't worry, Aunt Del. We'll make sure they get the message loud and clear." I had her dead to rights on conspiracy and premeditated harassment. But instead of celebrating, I felt that familiar pre-combat tension in my shoulders. This wasn't just about HOA violations anymore. Delilah had just declared war on my family. Time to show her what a real war looks like. The attack came on a Thursday morning while I was at my weekly physical therapy appointment for that old shoulder injury. Elena was loading groceries from her car, organic vegetables, prenatal vitamins, the kind of wholesome supplies you'd expect from a pediatric nurse preparing for motherhood. She was humming softly to herself, one hand unconsciously resting on her 7-month belly, when 3 Harley-Davidsons rumbled into our driveway like they owned the place. Randy and his 2 wannabe biker buddies, all leather vests, skull bandanas, and the kind of aggressive posturing that screams peaked in high school, surrounded my wife in a carefully choreographed intimidation display. The lead guy, some loser named Jake with prison tattoos and breath that probably smelled like stale beer and bad choices, stepped close enough to Elena that she instinctively backed against her car. "Ma'am, your husband's causing problems for this community," Randy said, reading from what was obviously a script his aunt had prepared. "There's going to be consequences for non-compliance with property regulations. Real, serious consequences." The beautiful thing about Elena: 7 months pregnant, facing down 3 bikers, and she stays ice-cold calm. Doesn't cry, doesn't beg, doesn't give them the fear reaction they're hunting for. Just nods politely, picks up her scattered groceries, and walks into our house with the dignity of a queen dismissing court jesters. But the moment she closed the door, she called me. "Honey, I think our HOA problem just got a lot more serious." I was in my truck and breaking every speed limit within 30 seconds. The taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth as I raced home, but by the time I arrived, the bikers were gone. Elena was shaken, but safe, already writing down everything she could remember about the encounter. Smart woman. She knew we'd need documentation. Here's where 12 years of military logistics training kicked into overdrive. I spent exactly 3 minutes making phone calls that would change Randy's life forever. First call: my buddy Marcus at the State Patrol, who ran the biker license plates through the system. Second call: a contact at the district attorney's office who specialized in organized intimidation cases. Third call: a private investigator who owed me a favor from my contracting days. The intel came back fast and beautiful. Randy had an outstanding warrant for unpaid child support. Jake was violating parole by associating with known criminals. The third guy, Tommy, had missed his court-ordered anger management classes. All 3 were looking at serious jail time if the right people started asking the right questions. And suddenly, those right people were very interested. My phone started ringing at exactly 3:17 p.m., Randy's girlfriend calling from the county lockup where he'd just been arrested on that outstanding warrant. "Please," she sobbed. "Whatever you did, just make it stop. He's got kids to support." Minutes later, Jake and Tommy showed up at my front door, not riding their bikes this time, walking like defeated men, hands shoved deep in their pockets, looking everywhere except directly at me. The sound of their boots on my porch was hesitant, apologetic, nothing like the aggressive swagger from that morning. "Look, man," Jake stammered. "We just want to apologize. This whole thing got way out of hand. Randy's girl said you might be willing to help if we cooperated." I let them sweat for a full minute before opening the door wider. "Come in. We need to talk." What they told me over the next hour would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. Delilah had paid them $500 cash to deliver a message to my family. She'd specifically requested they approach Elena when I wasn't home, hoping to terrorize a pregnant woman into convincing her husband to back down. The whole thing was premeditated harassment with a paper trail thicker than Randy's criminal record. Both men agreed to provide sworn statements in exchange for my promise to contact the DA about their cooperation. I recorded every word, documented their willingness to testify, and suddenly had enough evidence to destroy Delilah's life completely. But the most beautiful part, word of Randy's arrest spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church potluck. Residents who'd been quietly suffering under Delilah's reign suddenly realized that resistance was possible. The smell of rebellion was in the air, mixing with the evening barbecue smoke as neighbors started gathering in small groups, whispering about finally standing up to the tyrant next door. Delilah's empire was cracking, and she knew it. I caught her peeking through her curtains that evening, probably wondering how her foolproof intimidation plan had backfired so spectacularly. Minutes. That's all it took to turn her nuclear option into a complete disaster. But I wasn't done with Delilah Hartwell. Not even close. While Delilah was busy trying to intimidate my family with discount bikers, I was doing what military contractors do best, digging through paperwork until I found the smoking gun that changes everything. It started with a Freedom of Information Act request to the City Planning Department. Boring stuff, right? Wrong. What I discovered in those dusty municipal files would make Delilah's embezzlement look like petty theft. The original development agreement for Willowbrook Estates, signed in 2018, contained a requirement that 15% of all residential lots be reserved for moderate-income housing, affordable homes for teachers, firefighters, nurses, the people who actually keep communities running in a development of 85 homes. That meant at least 12 affordable units were supposed to exist. Guess how many affordable homes Delilah's real estate company actually built? 0. Not one single house sold for less than $400,000. Instead, she convinced the city council that market conditions made affordable housing economically unfeasible and promised to pay in lieu fees totaling $600,000 over 5 years. Except here's the kicker. She never paid a dime. The city's been sending collection notices for 3 years, and Delilah's been ignoring them like a college student avoiding student loan calls. But it gets better. Remember those HOA administrative fees that always seemed mysteriously high? I traced every payment through 6 years of financial records, following the money trail like breadcrumbs leading to a gingerbread house made of fraud. $340,000 in HOA funds had been funneled to Hartwell Property Solutions, a shell company owned by, guess who? The original HOA budget allocated $50,000 annually for legitimate management services. Delilah had been charging nearly $60,000 per year to her own company for services that either didn't exist or were grossly overpriced. Landscaping bills for work never performed, security contracts that violated competitive bidding requirements, consulting fees that would make a Fortune 500 CEO blush. Martha, our coalition's volunteer bookkeeper, spread the financial documents across my dining room table like a crime scene investigator. the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the rustle of damning evidence as she pointed to line item after line item of obvious theft. "Look here," she said, tapping a particularly egregious entry, $4,500 for emergency tree removal in January 2023. But I drove through the whole neighborhood that month documenting storm damage for insurance. No trees were removed anywhere. The scope of Delilah's corruption was breathtaking. She'd been systematically looting our community for 6 years while terrorizing anyone who asked questions. But here's the beautiful part. Her desperate attempts to maintain control had only accelerated her downfall. If the city revoked our community's incorporation status for violating the development agreement, property values could drop 20 to 30% overnight. Delilah's real estate empire would crumble, taking her personal net worth with it. She faced potential criminal charges for nonprofit fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty, crimes that carry federal prison time and asset forfeiture. Elena found me that evening, staring at the evidence spread across our kitchen table. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, settling into the chair beside me with a cup of herbal tea. "Not a ghost," I replied, holding up a bank statement showing Delilah's personal account receiving HOA funds. "I found our nuclear weapon. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Delilah thought she was fighting to maintain her authority, but she was actually fighting to stay out of federal prison. Every escalation, every desperate move she made only dug her legal grave deeper. Community solidarity strengthened daily. Residents began displaying "We Support Transparency" signs in their yards. The Neighborhood Watch program evolved into informal support networks for families targeted by Delilah's harassment. A GoFundMe campaign raised $12,000 in 48 hours to support legal expenses. The pressure cooker was ready to explode, and I held the trigger. Time for the final act. Delilah's final gambit was as desperate as it was predictable. Days before our scheduled community presentation, she filed a restraining order claiming I'd threatened her safety through systematic harassment and intimidation tactics learned from military training. The woman who'd sent bikers to terrorize my pregnant wife was now playing victim with Academy Award-worthy performance. Her evidence package included doctored audio recordings of me allegedly making threats, fabricated witness statements from neighbors who barely knew my name, and a tearful declaration about feeling unsafe in my own community due to coordinated stalking by a trained killer. The melodrama was so over the top that even her lawyer looked embarrassed filing the paperwork. But I'd expected this move and prepared accordingly. My security system had recorded every interaction between us, providing crystal-clear evidence that contradicted her fabricated timeline. Audio analysis by the same forensic expert we'd used for the financial investigation proved her recordings were edited and manipulated, digital cut-and-paste jobs that wouldn't fool a high school computer class. The restraining order hearing turned into Delilah's worst nightmare. Her attorney withdrew the petition after reviewing my counter-evidence, and the judge suggested she might want to consult with a criminal defense lawyer about filing false police reports. Watching her storm out of the courthouse, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Her next desperate move involved the media. Delilah contacted Channel 7 News with a sob story about military veterans using intimidation tactics against elderly women, complete with crocodile tears and claims about fearing for her safety. The reporter initially showed sympathy until I provided the comprehensive evidence file we'd compiled. Hours later, Channel 7 called back not to interview Delilah about harassment, but to investigate HOA corruption and financial fraud. The story had completely flipped, and suddenly local news was digging into 6 years of embezzlement and selective enforcement. Delilah's attempt to play victim had backfired into a public relations disaster. Meanwhile, our coalition accelerated the timeline for maximum impact. The community presentation moved to Sacred Heart Church's Fellowship Hall after Delilah tried, unsuccessfully, to cancel the school venue by claiming security threats. Within hours, we had a new location, expanded seating, and invitations sent to city council members, media representatives, and law enforcement observers. The night before our presentation, Delilah's remaining ally finally cracked. Bryce, the retired bank VP who'd rubber-stamped years of financial irregularities, appeared at my door, looking like a man who'd seen his own obituary. His hands shook as he handed me a manila envelope thick with bank records and internal communications. "She threatened my grandkids," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Said if I didn't keep quiet about the financial stuff, she'd make sure everyone knew about my past bankruptcy and destroy my family's reputation. I can't do this anymore." The documents Bryce provided were devastating. Bank records showing direct transfers from HOA accounts to private accounts, email chains discussing how to hide financial irregularities from annual reports, and recorded phone conversations where Delilah openly discussed intimidating board members who asked uncomfortable questions. But the most damning evidence was a signed confession Bryce had prepared detailing 3 years of financial manipulation and witness intimidation. He agreed to testify publicly about Delilah's threats and provide sworn statements to federal investigators. State and federal authorities were circling like sharks smelling blood. The Attorney General's office confirmed an active investigation into HOA financial crimes. The IRS began auditing 6 years of nonprofit tax filings and undeclared income. City attorneys were reviewing development agreement violations that could result in millions in penalties. FBI Financial Crimes Unit expressed interest in mail fraud charges related to falsified HOA documents. Elena, now days away from her due date, made a decision that surprised everyone. She would attend the community presentation despite pregnancy risks. "This affects our daughter's future," she explained while packing her hospital bag as a precaution. "She deserves to grow up in a community built on honesty and respect." The final evening before our presentation, I found myself surprisingly calm. After weeks of preparation, documentation, and strategic planning, the moment of truth felt more like relief than anxiety. The evidence was overwhelming. The community support was solid, and justice was finally within reach. Delilah spent that same evening barricaded in her McMansion, refusing interview requests, and reportedly drinking heavily. According to neighbors who heard her screaming at someone on the phone, her lawyer had already withdrawn from representation, leaving her to face the coming storm alone. The calm before the hurricane felt almost peaceful. Tomorrow, our community would finally learn the truth about 6 years of systematic corruption, financial theft, and intimidation tactics. Delilah's empire of fear would crumble under the weight of evidence, and from its ashes, we'd build something better. But first, she had to face the music in front of 300 neighbors, city officials, and television cameras. Justice was about to be served, and it was going to taste absolutely perfect. The Sacred Heart Church Fellowship Hall hadn't seen crowds like this since the annual Christmas pageant. 312 residents packed every chair, lined the walls, and spilled into the adjoining rooms where speakers carried the audio to overflow seating. City Councilwoman Patricia Williams sat in the front row with her notepad ready. Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit positioned himself near the exit with his badge clearly visible. Channel 7's news crew set up professional lighting that transformed our community meeting into a television studio. And in the back corner, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 days, sat Delilah Hartwell, alone. Her usual entourage of supporters had mysteriously found other places to be tonight, leaving her isolated in a sea of neighbors she'd spent 6 years terrorizing and robbing. Elena sat beside me on the small stage, 8 months pregnant and radiating the kind of quiet strength that makes ordinary women extraordinary. Her presence reminded everyone what was really at stake here, not just money or property values, but the kind of community we wanted for our children. I stood at the podium and looked out at faces I'd come to know over 6 months of investigation and coalition building. Martha with her determined expression. Diego checking his phone for media updates. Trevor and Sage holding hands like they were witnessing history. Phyllis Brennan with her legal files organized like ammunition in a war she'd been waiting decades to fight. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying easily through the packed hall. "Tonight, You're going to learn where your HOA fees have really been going for the past 6 years. The first slide on our professional presentation hit the screen like a bomb. Side-by-side comparison of budgeted versus actual administrative expenses, showing systematic inflation that had cost the community nearly $500,000. Collective gasp from 300 people sounded like air being sucked from the room. $480,000, I continued, letting the number sink in. That's roughly $6,000 per household that should have gone to community improvements, proper maintenance, and reserve funds. Instead, it went to shell companies owned by one person. The evidence rolled out like an avalanche. Fake vendor invoices for work never performed. Personal expenses charged to community accounts. Bank records showing direct transfers from HOA funds to private accounts. Each revelation drew louder murmurs from the audience, building towards something that felt like revolutionary fervor. But the smoking gun was the audio recording from behind the community center. Delilah's voice crystal clear through the sound system, directing her nephew to intimidate my family, whatever it takes to get them out. The reaction was immediate and visceral. 300 people turned to stare at Delilah like she'd confessed to murder in church. Someone in the back shouted, "Shame!" and others picked up the chant until the entire hall echoed with condemnation. That's when Delilah snapped. She shot to her feet, face flushed red with rage and desperation, pointing at me like I was the devil himself. "This is all lies!" she screamed over the crowd noise. "This man is a dangerous military radical trying to destroy our community. You people are too stupid to understand complex financial management." The insult hung in the air like toxic smoke. Calling your own neighbors stupid while being exposed for stealing their money. Even Shakespeare couldn't have written a better villain's downfall. Martha Kowalski stood up slowly, her church lady voice cutting through the chaos. "Delilah, dear, I've been doing community bookkeeping since before you were born. These aren't complex finances. This is simple theft." The crowd erupted in applause that lasted 2 full minutes. When it finally died down, witness after witness took the microphone. Martha revealed years of being forced to hide financial irregularities. Bryce confessed to being threatened when he questioned suspicious transactions. Randy's associates testified via video about being paid to intimidate families. Homeowners shared stories of selective enforcement, bogus fines, and harassment campaigns designed to silence questions. Each testimony built the case higher, creating an avalanche of evidence that buried Delilah's credibility completely. But the moment that broke her came when Detective Martinez stood up. "Miss Hartwell," he announced in his official police voice, "based on evidence presented here tonight and ongoing investigations, you're under arrest for filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit harassment and fraud." The handcuffs clicking around Delilah's wrists created the most beautiful sound I'd heard in months. As she was led away, still screaming about persecution and witch hunts, the entire hall stood and applauded. Not cruel celebration, but the satisfied relief of a community finally free from tyranny. Channel 7's reporter conducted live interviews in the parking lot as residents lined up to share their stories. "This is what grassroots justice looks like," she told the camera. "A community standing together against corruption and winning." The emergency vote was unanimous. Dissolve the existing HOA board immediately. Elect interim leadership with strict financial oversight and commit to complete transparency in all future operations. The old system died that night, replaced by something built on democracy instead of dictatorship. As we filed out of the fellowship hall, Elena squeezed my hand. "Think she finally got the message?" she asked with a tired smile. I looked back at the empty chair where Delilah had sat, then at neighbors talking excitedly about rebuilding their community the right way. "Loud and clear, sweetheart. Loud and clear." 6 months later, I'm pushing my 8-week-old daughter, Hope, through what used to be Delilah Hartwell's backyard, now transformed into the most beautiful memorial garden you've ever seen. The scent of native wildflowers mixes with fresh mulch as community volunteers plant the same drought-resistant species that started this whole war. The foreclosed McMansion looming behind us has become the Willowbrook Community Center, its windows bright with meeting rooms where transparency replaced tyranny. The legal reckoning was poetry in motion. Federal Judge Patricia Casey sentenced Delilah to 8 years in minimum security prison, her voice echoing through the courtroom. Financial fraud against one's own neighbors represents a particularly egregious breach of community trust. Full restitution of $680,000 plus interest and penalties that'll keep her broke until she's 70. Randy, her wannabe biker nephew, got 18 months, plus 3 years teaching motorcycle safety to teenagers. Amazing how facing real consequences helped him discover a talent for reaching kids who might otherwise follow his path toward pointless rebellion and petty crime. The house where Delilah once reigned like a suburban dictator sold at auction for $420,000. Our new democratically elected board purchased it immediately using recovered funds. Money that should have been spent on community improvements years ago instead of financing her luxury lifestyle. Every stolen penny was returned to residents with interest calculated by Martha's meticulous bookkeeping. But here's what really matters. Property values increased 12%, not because of authoritarian enforcement, but because young families started choosing Willowbrook specifically for our transparent governance and community-focused approach. Word spreads fast when neighbors actually support each other instead of living in fear. My consulting business exploded after Channel 7's follow-up stories went viral. Communities from Arizona to Florida beg for help, fighting their own HOA corruption. Elena teases that I've become the HOA whisperer, though I prefer thinking of myself as someone who helps ordinary people defeat institutional bullies using their own weapons against them. The ripple effects still amaze me. State Senator Margaret Torres sponsored the HOA Reform Act after our story reached her office. Annual independent audits and financial transparency now required statewide. The legislation passed unanimously and has already uncovered corruption in 47 other communities. Sometimes one victory creates dozens more. The Willowbrook Scholarship Program, funded entirely by recovered theft money, awarded its first grants last month, $12,000 each to 5 local students pursuing careers in education, healthcare, and public service. Martha chairs the selection committee, her face glowing with pride as she transforms Delilah's greed into opportunities for deserving kids. Our annual community festival, held on grounds where Delilah once plotted intimidation campaigns, celebrates everything she tried to destroy. The sizzle of barbecue mingles with children's laughter as families gather for evening concerts on the exact spot where corruption once festered in darkness. Hope's first birthday will be celebrated here, surrounded by neighbors who actually know each other's names. But the change I treasure most can't be measured in dollars or legal victories. Walking our streets now feels different, lighter, warmer, alive with genuine connection. Kids play without parents fearing violation notices. Neighbors chat over garden fences instead of communicating through passive-aggressive complaints. The native garden that triggered this whole war has become a neighborhood showcase copied throughout the development. My phone rang this morning. Desperate. Homeowner from Phoenix describing harassment that sounded achingly familiar. Selective enforcement, missing money, intimidation tactics designed to silence questions about financial irregularities. "Can you help us?" she whispered, voice carrying the same desperation I'd heard from neighbors 6 months ago. Elena looked up from feeding Hope, nodding before I could even ask. We both knew my answer. "Yes, ma'am, we absolutely can. See, fighting Delilah taught me something profound. One person with evidence and allies can defeat any corrupt system, but only if they're willing to stand up when it matters most. Bullies count on good people staying quiet, paying unfair fees, accepting abuse to avoid conflict. Your turn. Friends. Drop your HOA horror stories in the comments. I read every single one, and together, we can figure out your path to justice. Whether you're dealing with financial corruption, selective enforcement, or power-hungry board members who forgot they work for you, there's always a solution waiting in those governing documents. Hit that subscribe button for HOA stories if you want more David versus Goliath neighborhood justice content. And remember, the next time some petty tyrant tries to intimidate your family, you've got more power than you realize. Sometimes justice just needs one person willing to read the fine print and fight back. Welcome to HOA Stories, where communities take back their power one victory at a time. That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.